Welcome to SF Nonprofit Spotlight, brought to you by SF Commons TV. I'm Keli Dailey. So the San Francisco Beekeeping Association will show up into dangerous neighborhoods overrun by humans, and it'll help remove swarms of bees as a public service. They also do educational programs in schools and help support local beekeepers. Joining me today is the Vice President of the San Francisco Beekeeping Association, Taylor Capazello. Taylor.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here in Zoom land.
Yes.
As Vice President, you get speakers like scientists to come and address the group. Have they talked about the importance of the bee to the food supply? Especially we're having a lot of conversations about the food supply during this pandemic.
Yeah, hugely. Especially when we realize that basically one of every 3 bites of food that you consume is from bees or in some way. And we look at the fact of even bees just pollinating flowers, not having to do with food, and the flowers and how they are with the ground, aerating the ground, cleaning the water on so many levels that it goes back that it fixes. It's not just we think of directly like, oh, it makes this vegetable happen or something like that. So.
And you yourself have honeybees, is that correct?
Yeah, European honeybees. That's so you can't really keep other bees. I've heard of some people keeping bumblebees, and then you can get little, you can make little things out of like maybe bamboo or any sort of like hollow wood that you can create for a whole bunch of natural, like the regular native bees that are around, because they are single dwellers often, and they'll just kind of crawl into a safe space. And so there's lots of kits or ways you can just make it for yourself for native bees.
What can you tell us about San Francisco's number of bees? How is our landscape of bees looking?
Well, California alone has about 1,600 native bees in it. The U.S. has over 4,000, and the world has over 20,000. So there are so many different types of native bees that go. The European honeybee is one type. Right now, San Francisco is doing pretty good on our numbers. We have a lot of beekeepers that are in here. We don't always realize it. I mean, on my block, I have one block down, there's another beekeeper, 1 street up, there's one, 2 streets down. So we have a lot of beekeepers around. It's pretty exciting and a fun field.
It is a practice that's thousands of years old also, and it's really interesting that we're still learning ways to care for bees. Can you maybe tell us some of the challenges in raising a bee or a hive, I guess is, obviously I don't know anything about bees, you can tell. Raising a bee.
They're fun because you're always learning something. And so I've been doing this, and I'm always learning other facts. I follow all these different sites on Instagram, and I'm always surprised how many more facts I'm always learning. Your main job is to trick bees into staying into the hive that you've created for them. So bees naturally want to split. That's how they reproduce. So, within the hive, the queen lays a whole bunch of eggs and they reproduce that way. But once the hive becomes so full, they naturally want to split. A new queen is born, they go off, and it keeps going that direction. So when we live in a city, you don't want swarms to happen. And so your job is constantly tricking bees into creating more room for them. And that's what San Francisco Beekeeper Association is about, is learning how to do that. If your hive does swarm, how to catch it, how to bring it back, or to somebody else that wants a whole bunch of bees. And then the other thing comes into with what's going on in the world with climate change that we're having, the impact on that with the bees population. So years ago, before I was a beekeeper, I heard it was a lot easier. You'd get a hive and you could keep it going for several years before reintroducing a queen.
You mentioned some people keep bumblebees, and I was stung by one not too long ago. It was in my coat, of all the places for a bee to make a home. And I just wanted to hear, like, maybe you could describe some of the honeybee, bumblebee, kind of what are they here for? What's a bumblebee doing? Just pollinating, right?
Yeah, they're pollinating. I don't know as much about bumblebees. I think they're like the cutest panda bees ever, but I wish I knew more about them. I should, during the shelter in place, take some time and research them a little bit more. Um, but with honeybees, they're we get most fascinated by them because the fact that we can harvest their honey, which is food, any sort of products. We can use their wax for things. So there's so many, it's agriculture. There's so many things we can use from them besides the fact that they also pollinate everything. Bumblebees are pollinators. I'm sure there's plenty of other things they also do that help, but I'm not as good on that. So yeah, other than I think that they're ridiculously adorable. And one of them has been listed as an endangered species, and two are really close up on that list as well. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So it's probably looking for a home in your jacket.
But, to be carted around back to my house where it's nice and safe.
Yeah.
Speaking of endangered species, I know that bee health, we've talked about so much in the conversation about the climate crisis on how we can boost the health of our pollinators and other species. I'm wondering if you could tell us maybe what we can do to support bee health.
Yeah. So there's to keep it short, the easiest way that you can do is by planting a variety of flowers, even certain things like I said, leaving spaces for native bees to find a little home for themselves, or even not raking some of the leaves up that are under a tree that's fallen, because sometimes bees like to burrow in under that. Not the honeybees, but the native single dwellers. So lots of different things that give space for pollinators, and then also a wide flower variety, because some flowers certain bees are going to be attracted to and able to pollinate, and other ones others are. So the shape of it. So if we look at long ones, certain things like hummingbirds are going to be able to pollinate, while a bumblebee is not going to fit into there. So so variety, that's the easiest.
And obviously the San Francisco Beekeepers Association has lots of resources.
Yeah.
I know that the membership, it's been in the city for quite some time. Can you maybe tell us your origin story?
Yeah, so in 1976 is when SFBA was originated, and it was from two beekeepers that wanted to make it so they would teach other San Franciscans how to be beekeepers, how to catch swarms, how to keep it safe, and how to keep it going. We have this idea that we're in the city and that beekeeping is not possible, but it very easily is. So it's also very fun. For some people it's a hobby, some people it's a life, some people it can be their business. But anywhere on the spectrum, it's nice because you can devote a lot of time, or as minimal as, once every 2 weeks going out and checking on them and seeing how the ladies are doing. So.
Yeah, I've been obviously watching a lot of documentaries, kind of excited to, learn more about these neighbors that live in my coat. And what I was finding out is that the social organization of a hive is like a corporation. It's like everyone has a role and everyone's intent on doing it. Is there something that's really fascinating to you about how their colonies work out?
Oh my gosh. Well, everything. So my background is actually, my PhD is in psychophysiology. So I study the brain, and the brain is so similar to the hive. And there's lots of scientists coming out doing studies, combining the two of them, looking at how each individual bee is like a neuron in the brain. And then it as a whole, the hive becomes how we respond. So if you think about it, I don't want to this is where I can get way too excited about things, but if we're coming up to a stop sign and maybe it's at an angle and we can't decide if it's for us or if it's the street neighboring, we have our brains going back and forth and individual neurons are firing off. It's called a go, no-go task. And so we're figuring out if we're going to break or we're just going to go on through it. And eventually we realize which one it is, and that's what we go with. Now, bees are the same way. So when a study was done, when they swarm, half the hive leaves, and then there's these scout bees. And these scout bees would go and they would find a spot, and then they'd come back and they'd tell everybody about it, and they'd start recruiting. But another scout bee found another spot, and they'll actually go back and forth until they figure out which the best spot is, and then everybody goes to that one. So the same thing as a neuron firing for it. So there's that. But then there's also the fact that, I mean, the whole system is amazing. So when bees are born, they start off as nurse bees, and they're taking care of the larva, feeding it. And then as they get older, they also start then their wax glands, and they start building off, whether it's adding more comb, capping honey so it can ferment the nectar. And then they go on and they become guard bees. And then in their last weeks of life, they go out and they become the gatherers, where they go out and they collect honey or nectar and pollen and bring it in.
And I wanted to point out that earlier you said the ladies, these roles are majority female bees, right?
Yeah. So there's drones, which are males, and drones are only basically created around springtime. And so they look a little different in the cell. They have a longer gestation period. And the males are only there for mating purposes. And
they are.
yeah. And then at the end of the summer, then when they're no longer needed for that, they kick them out, and they can't fend for themselves, so they die. So
very fascinating, like just being able to nerd out and see like the culture of our bee community, and like it's so fascinating. If somebody wants to learn more, like how do they get involved in the Beekeeping Association?
So at sfbee.org, there we have our website, and it goes over everything. And to just become a member, I believe it's $35 for a year. And within that, you have access. Right now, we're doing everything on Zoom, so you don't even have to leave your house, and you can listen to all the talks. We also have them recorded. You can watch them later. We have a YouTube channel we're starting that goes over even things like, I think this weekend we're recording how to harvest honey. So that way our members can go through and access everything. In normal life, when we're not in shelter in place, we're doing a lot of hands-on experience, going to schools, talking. The membership goes towards all that. But what's also nice is there's so many mentors in that group. So once you're a member, if you have a question on something, somebody's going to come out, help you one-on-one with your hive, and make sure that you're understanding it, and you have a good support system for it. So it's nice because it's not alone.
Taylor, I really appreciate you spending this time telling us about bees and letting me make jokes about them too. They were like light jokes. It's payback for that sting.
Yeah.
And I really love to hear that you said your neighbors are beekeeping. Can you just tell us maybe the district that you're in, or just sort of like what's the vibe of where you are?
Yeah, so I'm in a neighborhood that few people know about called Visitation Valley. And we're kind of around between Candlestick and San Bruno State Park. But everywhere, there's beekeepers everywhere. So in my area, it's a lot more local, old timers. Of course, it's San Francisco, so the city changes over time. In the Mission, there's tons. So, it really doesn't matter about how the exact neighborhood is. And anytime you go on like Next Door Neighbor app or one of those things, you can usually barter, trade, or buy local honey from someone like within 2 blocks of you.
That's awesome. Well, I will be looking for some local honey, and I really do appreciate your time, Taylor. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much.
And let's talk radical theater. Since 1959, the San Francisco Mime Troupe has brought live radical plays to our parks. And with the new shelter-in-place reality, the collective is now bringing its revolutionary message to radio plays. Joining me today is the troupe's composer and lyricist, Daniel Savio. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Kelly.
So let's get this out of the way. The mime troupe makes noise, right? It's not like Marcel Marceau's live record album. Can you please tell us the origin of the name for the very last time in your life?
Yeah, the San Francisco Mime Troupe, never silent, always outspoken, or to put it another way, we're not that kind of mime. Yeah, it's song and dance. Well, no dance this year. The origin is that in, I think it's ancient Greek, the words that eventually became mime are related to mimicry. It has nothing to do with silent anything. That's a particular style that was developed by the French. But this is making fun of the reality we live in, everyday situations in story and song.
And you mentioned musical plays and satirical musical plays, which is really, I'm so happy to be speaking with the composer. Can you tell me a little bit how you create music and lyrics for the Mime Troupe shows? Like, how do you come up with songs? What is the role of the issues of the day in sharing an activist message?
Yeah, well, so it's a multi-tiered process. We start with the politics. We have to figure out what we're trying to say. And so it goes from politics to script, from script to lyrics, and then music added finally. In developing melodies, you also have to have an ear towards politics and towards the script. It all comes together to be telling the same story.
You mentioned the politics. Now, you don't do political shows like the West Wing might do a political show, right? You tackle pressing issues. In 2015, the troupe presented Freedom Land, which was about police, over-policing of Black and Brown communities. And how do you translate a political message into the mime troupe space?
Well, there's a necessity to bring the audience's attention, and especially when we're doing shows out of doors, you're competing with everything around you too. So you really have to have high energy and to remain very focused on message, and to have the script, keep the attention of people and be able to combine the entertainment aspect with the political aspect or the educational aspect, so that people maybe don't feel like they're being lectured to, even though in a sort of sense they might be.
Your new podcast serial, the radio plays that we mentioned a moment ago, they're called Tales of the Resistance. And each of them is devoted to a theme, a topical issue that we're facing now. Can you maybe talk about some of the themes tackled?
Yeah, so there's four different main characters, each of whose stories get told in a different classic radio drama style. The first episode, featuring Jade for Hire, is a detective noir, which is a style we're all very familiar with from many different sources, right? Dick Tracy or whatever. And we've had an adventure story, which in the past might have been told about, say, a naval officer or a pirate. But in our story, set in the modern day, our heroic adventure stars a nurse. And then we have a horror episode, which is also a very, very classic radio drama style. And we've tried to tailor the sounds and the music of each episode to fit in very, very specifically with those styles. The episode that is coming out the weekend following our interview is a science fiction episode with technology and innovation at its center. But again, still, as all of the episodes are, related to the larger struggle, the tales of the resistance being the struggle that we are all in right now, to create a better country and a better world.
So we're all stuck in our homes, and you're talking about these radio styles that were really familiar in the early 20th century, mid 20th century. And I'm wondering how a live performance troupe that performed in parks made the transition to radio, and tell us what that was like.
Sure. It's tricky, and it continues to be tricky. So we are doing this mostly in isolation from one another, remotely in each of our homes. Of course, there are a number of technical hurdles to be surmounted, both just in terms of the hardware that each of us might have available to us, but also in terms of our individual internet connections. And then also our ability to master the software that we have to be using as well. So our audio engineer and sound designer, Taylor Gonzalez, has also been hugely helpful stepping into the IT role as well, helping people to figure things out. We've got a couple of other folks who have also have a deep enough understanding of the technical aspects to help individuals with that. But then on top of that, it's also very hard to rehearse when you're not in physical proximity to one another. So we lose some level of interaction that we otherwise would have, and we have to kind of work harder to make up for that in certain ways. So it is challenging, but it's also really exciting and fun. It gives us opportunities to try things that we wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Can you tell us about the transition? Because I guess in March, when we all went to sleep, when we all had to stay in our homes, I think theater may have had a different kind of approach to this. Was it like sit and wait and see? What was the conversation to then produce in a entirely different medium?
There was a little bit of wait and see. We made 2 or 3 different plans and decided later, okay, which one of these are we going to really pursue? At a certain point, I don't remember now exactly when it was, but at a certain point it became obvious that we were not going to be able to have our regular season. But we felt, based on what was happening in the country and based on the kind of the emotional needs of us and our audience during this extremely difficult time, we needed to be out there. We needed to do something. We couldn't just cancel the season. We needed to do something. So there were a few different ideas thrown around. A number of other companies have been trying things that are essentially filmed through Zoom or presented as if they were filmed through Zoom. We did consider that. We decided ultimately that for a number of different reasons, including what skills and resources we have within the company, and also just what we felt we would be capable of doing, we decided to go with a project that has no video element, no visual element at all. And it happens, and this is part of what went into the decision, but it happens that the mime troupe style actually really lends itself to radio drama very, very well.
What's the style?
Well, the mime troupe, we do a variety of styles, but the main idea is that we are taking what is called commedia dell'arte, and using ideas from that along with slightly more modern ideas to put something on stage that feels both sort of experimental but also rooted in tradition. But this commedia dell'arte idea means we have very recognizable situations and characters. You've got the villain, you've got the lovers, you have the hero who can come in and just, stand with their feet apart and take command of the stage. It's different when it's on the radio. You have to do it all with voices and sound effects and sometimes saying things out loud that we wouldn't necessarily expect to hear out loud. And our head writer, Michael Gene Sullivan, handles that in different ways in different episodes, works it into the overall style of each episode so that we don't feel like, oh, that was a very strange thing for that person to say out loud. We try to make it fit.
I'm specifically thinking of the noir episode where the Private Dick character is narrating out loud sort of his voiceover, and everyone
Right.
can hear him, so it's kind of funny.
Right, and doesn't always realize that he's talking out loud. That's right. That's right.
Daniel, let's talk about you for a moment. Your roots in the Bay and activism run deep. Your father is the famous free speech movement activist at Berkeley in the 1960s, Mario Savio. And if think about in the 60s, the political protests that your father was leading and the police action against that movement, what do you think he might say about constitutional rights and conscience of community that we're experiencing right now this summer?
Yeah. Well, I think that the times that we're in would be both at the same time very disheartening and also very encouraging. We're living in very difficult times. There are parts of the government that are, the government and the corporate sector as well, that are really pushing against freedom, pushing against justice. But on the other hand, there seems to be at least something of a raising of public consciousness in response to some of these things as well. Which is it's not perfect. It's not going to solve all the problems all at once, but it is at least a little bit encouraging. I think that Mario would probably say that the very strong push by the forces of fascism, essentially, is at least in part because they're desperate. They see that they're losing. They see that things that the global consciousness movement, essentially, is actually having an effect. Things are improving for some folks in that regard. And the powers that be don't like that at all. So they're fighting back very hard. So I think Mario would remark that that's a sign of weakness. They are scared. Their back is to the wall. They're fighting back because of that. On the other hand, that makes them very dangerous.
I get a lot of that from the Tales of the Resistance in the ways that it's told through story, but there are also a lot of calls to action. And if I could ask you one final question, I know that being a mime troupe in the liberal capital of America, so-called San Francisco, that you get some criticism sometimes about being preaching to the choir. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's not a completely unfair criticism. Our audiences usually are also from the left side of the spectrum, but it is not simply a matter of just talking to people who already agree with us. It's a matter, first of all, of stirring the base. So that when you preach to the choir, you're not just telling them something they already know, you're also lifting their spirits so that they can go forth and sing and lift the spirits of the entire congregation. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying. Yes, we're preaching to the choir in that sense. We're preaching to the congregation is what it really comes down to, and trying to lift their spirits, trying to put them in a mood and a mindset where they can take that energy inside themselves and then go forth and themselves do good work in the world.
Daniel, for the good work that the Mime Troupe has been doing for 61 years in the world, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. The pleasure was mine, Kelly. Thank you.